Great to be joined in the studio here at the Flow Broadcast Centre by Tony Pasin, the member for Barker. How are you, Tony?
I'm good, thanks, Ricky. First time in the studio. It's an amazing facility.
Yes, we've turned it on nice and blue for you, the Liberal blue as well. Hope you're feeling at home.
Completely at home.
All right, Tony, look, the federal election, it's a long campaign and there's plenty of time for you to cover the whole electorate. How's it going from your point of view so far?
Really well. I mean, campaigns are and should be robust exercises. There are 9 candidates seeking election as the next member for Barker. I'm seeking to be returned in that role. I'm continuing to rack up the kilometres. I drive 100,000 kilometres a year outside of an election contest. I'm doing that and continuing to do that at the moment. The vibe is particularly strong, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity over this campaign to remind the electors of Barker of the things that together we've achieved. My record of delivery is something I'm incredibly proud of.
Now, just looking back on the numbers, is 9 a record number of candidates in Barker, or certainly in the times you've run?
Certainly in the times I've run. The last time we had this number of candidates was 1998. I should say it's not unique to Barker. There seems to be a
lot everywhere.
Upwelling of candidates
7% more, I think,
across the country. I think that's a great thing.
Yeah,
I honestly think that's a great thing. And when we dealt with dealing with the 1 in 100 year pandemic has brought a lot of really difficult things and really bad things to us. But one of the things I think that we can be pleased about is it's raised people's attention when it comes to democracy and government. And I think that's a great thing. As someone who's advocated for better civics education for a very long time, I think the pandemic's been a great thing to remind us all about how important our vote is. And what a great privilege it is for those of us who get that privilege to represent our communities in the federal parliament. And I'm really pleased to see a large number of people on the ballot.
Now, the privilege to represent Barker has been given to you, 5 times, is it?
Not quite. I was elected in 2013, re-elected in 16, 19, and now I seek re-election in 2022. So it is an immense privilege, Ricky. Only 9 people in total have held the title of the member for Barker since 1903. It's not lost on me how important it is. And I remember when I was pre-selected, driving home from Bordertown to Mount Gambier, I didn't say a word, and the people accompanying me on that drive found that unusual because I'm never short of one. What had just happened at the pre-selection dawned on me, and how not only is it a privilege, but it's a massive responsibility. But your listeners have a huge responsibility on the 21st of May. Elections are choices, and they'll need to consider who is best able to represent them in the federal parliament. Is it someone who's been performing this role for 8.5 years and has a history of delivery, or others who are untested and untried in this role? It's a massive electorate. It's the size of Croatia. The issues in the Riverland are very different to the issues in the southeast. As someone, Ricky, who's worked in politics, you know that particularly for regional electorates, you need someone who has a track record of getting things done, because if you're not a loud and boisterous type in the federal parliament on behalf of small communities, then you just don't get the attention that these communities deserve.
Now, for your communities, I noticed you were at an opening recently at Lameroo and Pinaroo for local facilities under the Building Better Regions Fund. That's an example of where I guess people start looking at the record in terms of projects that have been delivered in Barker. The Guardian sort of listed Barker about 74th out of 150 in the porkometer, as they call it, but I'm not sure how accurate their figures are. What have you got pledged so far this campaign for Barker?
Well, announced actually today, $1.8 million as an example for childcare at Kingston. It's a long-running SOAR in Kingston. There are about 50 families on the waiting list. I'm pleased you've raised that article in The Guardian. I looked at it closely because it just didn't make any sense to me, because on that calculation, we're talking about $5 million in deliverables for Barker. And when I reviewed it, I understood exactly what has happened here. What's happened is The Guardian has gone to election promises as opposed to projects that have been delivered during the term. I'm about delivering outcomes. I'm less about promises, Ricky, because promises are only as good as it being delivered. And so whether it's the Truro bypass at $160 million, or it's a rec centre at Mount Gambier, or it's a hydrotherapy pool in the Barossa, I'm enjoying the opportunity I'm given during the election campaign to remind your listeners of the things that we have achieved together. And the important part of that is it's not Tony Pasin who does this all on himself or by himself. This is me as your local representative partnering with your community and with you to deliver better outcomes for you. I pride myself on ensuring that all communities across Barker are even better places to live, work and raise a family.
Now, we've talked here on Flow, we're envious of Townsville getting $5 billion promised by the Coalition to build the Hells Gate Dam. Are we going to see a big announcement like that in Barker, like a duplication of the Dukes Highway to the border?
Well, Ricky, I'm someone who, now that I've had the privilege for 8.5 years, I'm starting to look to the blue sky projects in my electorate. These roles, and ultimately whether I may continue in this role, is a matter for your listeners and electors in Barker otherwise. But I'm starting to consider those really blue sky projects as, you know, having spent enough time in the Parliament and built up enough capital to be able to spend some politically. And I've got to tell you, I'm someone I've come out recently and said the blue sky infrastructure projects in my electorate are the duplication of the Dukes and Sturt highways to the borders. And I also want to see a bridge over the Murray at Springcart Gully. Those are the, if you like, South Road scale projects in my electorate. And I tell you what, if you re-elect me as the member for Barker, you're going to hear a lot about the duplication of those roads, particularly the Dukes. An example there is we've got it duplicated to Tailem Bend. It's duplicated on the Victorian side of the border. This is a project that I reckon conservatively is 20 years overdue. And of course, the Sturt Highway, if we can duplicate that all the way to the Riverland and effectively the border, that'll allow us to put even more significant mass vehicles on the road. It's a productivity measure, it's a safety measure, and it's something that I'm looking forward to championing. But it's not the kind of commitment you get tomorrow. It's something you need to build the case for with Infrastructure Australia and with the support of whoever finds themselves in government at a state level.
Yep, I think the RAA is in fulsome agreement with you there. Tony, we've spoken a bit about the River Murray and how important it is, particularly for the electorate of Barker. This 450 gigalitre commitment that I think all the major parties are on board with, the 450 being delivered. However, from a coalition point of view, there's a concern that it has to tick social and economic boxes as well as just environmental. But we're only seeing about 2 or 3 of those 450 gigalitres delivered. Do you think we'll ever see those 450 come over the border to South Australia?
Well, Ricky, the 450 based on the triple bottom line is not just a coalition position. I mean, that's embedded in the Murray-Darling Basin Agreement, which is an agreement that requires the approval of all Murray Basin states, including the Commonwealth. And so,
but the National Farmers Federation seems to they want to junk it. They don't want the 450.
Well, no. My position is that the 450 needs to be achieved in accordance with the plan. But the plan says you can only achieve that 450 if you don't, in achieving it, occasion socio-economic harm to river communities. So programs we've run to this point have achieved that goal in the sense that programs that provide capital in exchange for water recovery allow us to produce just the same number of almonds or wine grapes or citrus with less water, returning water to the plan and effectively to the Commonwealth. What we don't want to see is the lazy approach to water recovery, which is what you do is you get in a shiny white car in Canberra with a briefcase full of cash and you drive up to the Riverland and you basically buy water back, denude the Riverland of that productive water which drives our economy. And, you know, there are lots of South Australians that effectively think that if you're not committed come hell or high water, pardon the pun, to the 450, you're not being or not acting like a proud South Australian. I want South Australians to understand that 450 includes 32 gigs, in my estimate, of South Australian water. This isn't just water from interstate. This includes South Australian water. And for anyone who might not understand what 32 gigs looks like, that's the whole of the Renmark Irrigation District. So if you were driving in through the Riverland, you could imagine that kind of barren landscape as you enter the Riverland. Where it's green because we irrigate. Imagine if all of the area surrounding Renmark was that barren landscape again. That's what we're talking about if we don't do this properly. And I'm all about achieving the plan in full and on time, but I'm not going to cruel river communities while I do it. And the reality is there are smart ways to do this and there are dumb ways, desperately dumb ways to do it. The Labor Party have said they will action or return to buybacks. That is a particularly dumb way of achieving this outcome, and it will cruel river communities. And quite frankly, for your listeners who might not be connected to the river or the production of fruit and vegetables on the river, you'll be harmed too, because you'll either be eating foreign fruit or you'll be paying a heck of a lot more for that fruit. So before we simply blindly say, oh, it's $4.50 or bust, have a think about what that means for South Australian producers. And if we go to buybacks, then you're basically cruelling a district the size of Renmark within the Riverland.
Now, speaking of another $4.50, the Prime Minister announced that amongst the 1.3 million jobs pledged for Australia, 450,000 of those will go into regional Australia. Roughly 50 federal electorates are regional. That would be about 9,000 jobs in Barker. Are we confident we'd see them in Barker?
I reckon they're there now, Ricky. The reality is every employer I speak to is desperate for staff. The challenge in regional Australia is not employment, although we will continue to grow and jobs will come with that growth, and there is immense opportunity. I visited a facility in Robe that has a 3,000% growth opportunity. The challenge is not jobs. The challenge is people to fill them, Ricky, and so as important as a focus on jobs is, and of course we are focused on growing the economy, I want to make sure that we have the appropriate labour force to make sure that we can produce what we need to and take advantage of that potential as we exit the global pandemic.
Is part of the strategy there to have more attractive regional apprenticeship arrangements? Some of our young people, they'll go to town, go to Adelaide to take up an apprenticeship, and then they'll jag a job at a mine or something like that and never come back.
Well, Ricky, if we're being plain, I mean, there are boosting apprenticeship programs that provide a 50% wage subsidy for apprentices and trainees. It's been a fantastic program that began out of a concern for youth around youth unemployment in the pandemic, but has continued because it's been, quite frankly, very successful. And the apprentice today is your tradesman of tomorrow, and we need more of those, quite frankly. But the reality is we need to attract population growth to the regions if we're going to meet the demand for labour and achieve the potential of our regions. And we saw during the pandemic that Australians, quite frankly, don't want to move from capital cities to the regions. And so the solution, in my view, for this labour demand is migration from overseas. The ag visa is an approach our party has adopted. We've signed a bilateral agreement with the Vietnamese. I wish that we could sign more agreements with more foreign countries. Unfortunately, the trade union movement has been dealing with embassies one-on-one and dissuading them from signing up to the ag visa. That's really disappointing. And then again, it's not surprising because Labor has come out and said they'll get rid of the ag visa program. I don't know who they think is going to pick our fruit, work on our farms, or help build our regional economies. Temporary workers, whether they're backpackers or Pacific Islanders, are great. But someone who's living permanently in your town is much better. They'll join the CFS, they'll volunteer at the footy club, they'll enrol their kids in schools, and let's face it, under the Ag Visa program or a migration program like it, people are going to come from Southeast Asia and the Pacific, and if they come from the Pacific, Ricky, we might end up winning the Bledisloe Cup. Added advantage.
Speaking of sport, I'll just finish on one last topic. Your South Australian Liberal colleague, Alex Antic, has been on the warpath about this issue about women playing other women in sport. I've encountered this as a coach in junior sport, where girls are playing against biological boys in this context. What is a woman, as the question that Alex Antic's been asking bureaucrats? What's your answer to what a woman is?
Well, it's a simple question which calls for a simple answer. It's a adult female. And I can't believe that senior bureaucrats in this country had to take that question on notice, including our Chief Medical Officer. But hasn't Senator Antic done a fantastic job of highlighting how far we have travelled down this woke pathway to the point of nonsense, quite frankly. Ricky, I've got 2 daughters. They describe themselves as petite because they got sick of people calling them small. You know, I'm 5'4" flat out. I employed a young lad who's not much older than my 12-year-old for a gap year. You know, I'm 6 years older than her. He was 6'3" and weighed 140 kilograms and is a very talented footballer. Now, if he were to play football in 6 years' time against my 12-year-old, well, against my daughter once she turns 18, who will probably weigh 50 kilograms, forget about questions of a fair go, which, of course, I don't think that would be very fair. I'd be worried about her safety. If he tackled her in any serious way, he's likely to injure her seriously, if not do her grievous bodily harm. Now, I just don't want us to forget that in this debate. It's as much about safety as it is about a fair go. And I think it's pretty sensible, isn't it?
What does it tell us, though, about politics in Australia, that this has dominated the election campaign for the first couple of weeks, or at least the mainstream media in metropolitan Sydney?
Well, I'm pleased it has, because quite frankly, I think it's shone a light on something that the Quiet Australians or Tony's Tradies or Howard's Battlers or Robert Menzies Forgotten People would say, and that is, let's just get back to common sense. Can someone please inject some common sense into the Canberra bubble? And that's exactly what Senator Antic did at estimates recently. And my favourite vision out of that is, I don't know if you saw the New South Wales Premier ask the question on a radio station a bit like yours. He hadn't heard the audio when it was played to him, and he just started laughing. and his point is, that's all you need to know in terms of where we've got to as a country, if this is actually a question, A, that needs asking, and B, is answered by a senior bureaucrat taking it on notice. It's completely ridiculous. Again, you know, my 12-year-old knows what a woman is. I don't think we need to run scared of saying what is a biological truth.
Well, Tony Pasin, great to have you join us on issues big and small for everyone all over the electorate of Barker. Much appreciated, and thanks for coming into the studios.
Pleasure, Ricky.